You know that moment when you're scrolling through social media and you see someone who just seems to have it all figured out? Like, they're always traveling. Their apartment looks like an interior design magazine. They're wearing clothes that actually fit their body, and somehow they make it all look effortless. And then you look at your bank account and you're like, how is this even possible? You do the math based on their job alone. They shouldn't be able to afford any of this. But here's the weird thing. Sometimes these people aren't actually rich. Sometimes they're not even close to being rich. They're just really, really good at looking rich. And that's a skill, honestly. That's actually a fascinating skill. Not always a good one, but definitely a skill. My name is Puli, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, like genuinely too much time. I think about financial psychology. I think about why some people seem to glide through life with this air of abundance, while others are constantly stressed about their bank account, even when they probably have enough. And the more I look at this, the more I realize there's this whole hidden layer to how people present themselves financially. It's not about being fake necessarily. It's more subtle than that. See, the thing that nobody really talks about is that looking rich and being rich are actually two completely different skill sets. And if you understand the habits that make people look rich, you can start to figure out which ones are actually worth adopting, and which ones are basically financial quicksand dressed up in designer packaging. So here's what we're diving into today. 10 habits of people who only look rich. Some of these habits are actually genius-like. They've cracked a code about how the world perceives them, and some of them are just, well, they're expensive ways of avoiding uncomfortable feelings. By the end of this, you're going to be able to spot the difference. And more importantly, you're going to understand what's actually going to move you forward financially versus what's just going to keep you stuck on the hamster wheel of looking good while feeling broke. Habit 1. They master the effortless vibe. Let's start with something that sounds simple, but is actually really complex. People who look rich have this strange ability to make everything look casual. Like, they're not trying. They just exist, and somehow their existence is expensive. This shows up in 1,000 ways. They'll wear a $7 thrift store shirt, but they'll pair it with a $200 bag. They'll drive a car that's 5 years old, but it's always clean, always maintained. They'll talk about their vacation to Bali like it wasn't a big deal, like, oh yeah, we just decided to go last minute, when in reality, they spent 3 months planning it and saved aggressively. The reason this matters is because looking like you didn't have to try is actually incredibly powerful. The brain registers effort as desperation. So when someone looks like they effortlessly have money, you automatically assume they have more of it than they probably do. It's psychology. It's the same reason that people with confident body language are perceived as more successful, even if they're not. But here's the catch, and this is important. Actually, achieving this vibe requires a ton of intentionality. They're being careful about what they show. They're being strategic. So it's not actually effortless. It just looks effortless. And that distinction matters because you can do this yourself if you want to. You just have to understand that it's a conscious choice, not something that happens naturally. The actionable takeaway here? You don't need to spend more money to look more put together. You need to spend your money more intentionally. Pick a few things that really matter. Maybe it's a great bag, or really nice skincare, or perfectly fitting jeans, and invest in those. Then be casual about the rest. That's the actual secret. Habit 2. They understand the power of scarcity. Okay, this one is subtle. People who look rich rarely do the thing that actually broke people do, which is talk about their purchases, or brag about their things. They don't say, oh my god, I got this amazing thing on sale, or look what I bought. They just have things. There's this weird psychological principle that the less you talk about something, the more expensive or valuable it seems. Like, if someone's constantly showing off their new car or their new phone, your brain automatically goes, oh, they're excited about a purchase. That means they don't usually get new things. That means they're probably not that rich. But if someone just casually mentions they have something without fanfare, your brain goes, they probably have nice things all the time. They're not even thinking about it. I noticed this a few years ago at a work event. There was a guy there who had just come back from somewhere nice, and someone asked him about it. And instead of launching into this whole detailed story about the experience, he just said, "Yeah, it was good," and moved on. That's it. One sentence. And somehow that made it seem way cooler and way more expensive than it probably was. The people who look rich understand this. They don't need to convince you they're rich. They just kind of exist. And you fill in the blanks yourself. This habit is actually really healthy, by the way, because the less you talk about what you have, the less you're tied to your possessions. There's something psychologically freeing about that. It's like your worth isn't attached to your stuff. Habit 3. They spend on visibility. They're cheap on everything else. This is where it gets interesting. People who look rich are obsessed with the idea of what people can see. So they'll spend a decent chunk of money on things that are visible. Clothes, shoes, a nice bag, maybe a car that turns heads. Stuff that people actually see when they're looking at them. But then, in their private life, they're weirdly frugal. They'll eat rice and beans at home. They'll shop at discount grocers. They'll have threadbare sheets that nobody sees. They'll buy the cheap toilet paper. They don't care. Why? Because the perception is built on visibility. If nobody's seeing your sheets don't affect how rich you look, so why spend money on them? This is actually kind of genius from a pure perception standpoint. And I get why people do it. But here's the thing that nobody talks about this habit, is basically saying, I would rather feel uncomfortable in my own home than have people perceive me as anything less than successful. And that's actually a really sad trade-off. Because your home is where you spend most of your time. Your comfort matters. Your sleep matters. The quality of your private life matters. But when you're optimizing for perception, you're sacrificing those things. The people who are actually rich, the ones with real money, they tend to do the opposite. They'll spend a crazy amount on things nobody sees. They'll have amazing mattresses, beautiful furniture that's for their own enjoyment, quality kitchen equipment because they actually cook. But their social presentation, it's more relaxed because they don't need the perception. So this habit is a major red flag. It's not sustainable. And it's not actually making them happier. Habit 4. They're extremely conscious of timing and cycles. People who look rich understand something that most people don't. There are seasons to spending. There are times when certain things are okay to show off, and times when it's kind of tone deaf. Like, you wouldn't brag about a vacation while your friends are going through financial stress. You wouldn't buy a new car right after someone you know had to file for bankruptcy. It's not just about being sensitive. It's about perception. And people who look rich understand that perception is contextual. They also understand cycles. They know that if everyone around them just bought new cars, it's probably not the time for them to get a new car, because it won't stand out. It will just look like they're following the trend. But if they wait 6 months, suddenly when they get a car, it feels like they're ahead of the curve. It feels intentional. It feels rich. This is actually something that took me a while to notice. But once you start paying attention to it, you see it everywhere. People who look rich are timing their moves. They're watching the cultural moment. They're thinking about what will read as successful right now, as opposed to just doing whatever they feel like. The problem with this habit, and honestly, it's a big one, is that it requires you to be constantly aware of what other people are doing and thinking. You have to be constantly performing. You can never just exist. You have to be always making these micro calculations about whether something is going to improve your image or tank it. That's exhausting. That's actually really exhausting. But I'll say this. If you want to look rich, you have to do this. That's part of the deal. Habit 5. They have a signature aesthetic. Okay, this is one of the habits that I actually think is genuinely good, even beyond the looking rich thing. People who look rich usually have a consistent aesthetic. They're not all over the place. Like, they might wear neutral colors, or they might have a specific vibe like very minimalist, or very bohemian, or very put together professional. But they've committed to something, and they stick with it. So when you see them, You immediately recognize their style. You immediately know it's them. This actually serves two purposes. One, it makes them look more intentional, like they know what they're doing, like they understand who they are. That reads as successful and confident. But two, and this is the practical benefit, it makes their life cheaper. Because once you commit to a specific aesthetic, you can buy strategically. You can know exactly what pieces will work in your wardrobe. You're not buying random things that don't match. You're not wasting money on stuff that doesn't fit the aesthetic. You're building a cohesive collection. So this is actually a habit where looking rich and being smart with money kind of overlap. It's a win-win. You get to look more polished and intentional, and you actually save money in the process. Habit 6. They're weirdly good at borrowing. This one's interesting because it reveals something uncomfortable about the whole looking rich thing. A lot of people who look incredibly rich are actually just really good at access. Like, they have friends who own vacation homes, so they can say they were in the Hamptons last summer, even though they didn't pay for anything. They have connections with brands that give them early access to new stuff. They know someone who can get them in the VIP section. They can borrow a suit for a wedding instead of buying one. And I'm not talking about actually borrowing something and returning it. I'm talking about the way they present it. They'll say, I'm going to my friend's place in Malibu. And what they're not saying is that they're the friends plus one, and they're not paying for anything. To an outside observer, it sounds like they have access to a Malibu house. This habit is actually pretty smart in some ways because it expands their perception of wealth without them actually having to spend money. But it's also, it's kind of built on a house of cards. Because eventually people figure out what's going on. And then instead of looking rich, they look like they're trying really hard to look rich, which is actually the opposite of the effortless vibe. The people who are actually rich, they don't really borrow like this. They just have their own stuff. So this is another red flag. Habit 7. They have strict boundaries around money talk. People who look rich have a really interesting relationship with money conversations. They almost never talk about how much they paid for things. They'll never say, I got this dress for $200. They'll just talk about the dress. If you ask where it's from, they'll tell you, but they won't mention the price. They also won't ask you how much you paid for things. They've learned that money talk is beneath the image they're projecting. Rich people don't nickel and dime. They don't haggle. They don't care how much things cost. So people who are trying to look rich adopt this habit of just never discussing the financial side of purchases. This actually creates this interesting gap where you literally can't figure out if they have money or not. And that's kind of the point. The mystery is part of the brand. But here's what I've noticed, and this is kind of psychological. When people avoid money talk, it often means they're insecure about it. Either they don't have much money and they're embarrassed, or they're hyper aware of how much they're spending and they don't want to be caught. Real wealthy people, they can talk about money pretty openly. Actually, they don't have shame around it. So again, this habit is great for looking rich, but it's not necessarily a sign that someone is actually rich. Habit 8. They never apologize for their choices. This is a smaller habit, but it's actually really powerful. People who look rich just make decisions and own them. They don't apologize for taking time off work. They don't explain why they got a tattoo or dyed their hair. They don't justify their meal choices or their fashion choices or their lifestyle choices. There's something about confidence that screams success. And the people who look most rich are the ones who just decide something and then do it, without seeking approval or validation. This is actually one habit that's genuinely good advice for everyone, not just people trying to look rich, because so much of looking small and unsuccessful is about apologizing for taking up space. It's about justifying your choices. It's about seeking permission. But if you just decide something, and then do it with confidence, people assume you know what you're doing. They assume you have a good reason. They assume you're the kind of person who makes good decisions. So yeah, this is a habit worth adopting regardless of whether you want to look rich or not. Habit 9. They're strategic about their struggles. Okay, this is a weird one, but I want to talk about it because it's really common and it's kind of insidious. People who look rich are very selective about the struggles they share. They won't talk about money stress. They won't talk about being tired or overwhelmed. But they will strategically mention small, aesthetically acceptable problems. Like, they'll say, "Oh my God, I'm so stressed about finding the right apartment in the right neighborhood," instead of, "I'm stressed about affording rent." They'll talk about being exhausted from traveling instead of talking about financial anxiety. They'll mention that their cleaning service quit, like it's a tragedy, when most people would love to have a cleaning service at all. What they're doing is curating their struggles to match their image. Their problems are first world problems. Their stress is the kind of stress that comes from having options. And that's a very specific kind of messaging. The reason I think this is important to talk about is because it creates this weird distortion of reality. If you only ever see the curated struggles of people who look rich, you start to think that the only real problems are the luxurious kind. You start to feel bad about different problems. You start to compare your real, unglamorous stress with their Photoshop stress. And you feel like you're failing. But the truth is, they have the same kinds of stress everyone has. They're just choosing not to talk about it. They're just choosing to only share the parts that make them look like they're living a certain kind of life. Habit Hasson 0. They understand that consistency is more important than splurging. And finally, here's the last habit. People who look rich rarely blow all their money on one massive purchase. Instead, they're consistent. They look good consistently. They have nice things consistently. They travel consistently. They're not the type to save for 6 months to buy one designer bag and then have nothing left. They're the type to always have money for the things that matter to them. This habit is actually based on something really smart, which is that consistent quality reads as wealth. Like, if you see someone who looks really good one day and then looks kind of rough the next day, your brain goes, "They're trying sometimes." But if you see someone who always looks polished, always looks like they have their life together, your brain goes, "This person is like this all the time. This person has resources." The way they do this is by prioritizing. They figure out what matters for their image, and they make sure they're consistent about those things. Then the other stuff, it doesn't matter. But the visible stuff, it's consistent. Here's the thing about this habit though, it actually requires discipline and planning. Because to look rich consistently, you have to be intentional about your money. You have to know where your money is going. You have to make choices that align with your image. That's actually the opposite of reckless spending. It's very controlled. So this is interesting because it means the people who look richest are often pretty disciplined about their money. They're just disciplined in service of a specific goal, which is looking like they have more than they do. So here's the thing that I think is really important to realize about all of this. These habits, they're not inherently bad, and they're not inherently good either. They're just tools. They're ways of using psychology and perception to control how people see you. Some of these habits, like having a consistent aesthetic, or never apologizing for your choices, or understanding the power of simplicity, those are actually genuinely good. They'll make your life better, whether you have money or not. They'll make you feel more confident. They'll make you feel more in control. But some of these habits, like spending all your money on visible things while your private life falls apart, or constantly borrowing to maintain an image, or curating your struggles so people think your life is better than it is, those habits come at a cost. They're exhausting. They're unsustainable. And they often lead to financial stress instead of actual wealth. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Looking rich and being rich are different things. And you get to choose which one matters to you. You get to choose what you're optimizing for. If you want to look rich because it makes you feel confident, that's a legitimate choice. Just make sure you're doing it in a way that's sustainable. Make sure you're not sacrificing your actual comfort and security and peace of mind for a perception. But if you actually want to be rich, or if you want to build real financial stability, then you need to understand that the habits that make you look rich are often the opposite of the habits that actually make you wealthy. Real wealth is built on boring, invisible things. It's built on saving. It's built on investing. It's built on making decisions based on long-term security instead of short-term perception. The good news is, you don't have to choose one or the other. You can build real wealth while also looking like you have it. You can be consistent and intentional. You can have a cohesive aesthetic. You can be confident about your choices. You can hold boundaries around money conversations. But you have to do it as a means to an end, not as the end itself. So going forward, I want you to think about which of these habits you're actually using. I want you to think about whether they're serving you, or whether they're just keeping you on a hamster wheel of looking good while feeling stressed about money. Because you deserve both. You deserve to feel rich and to look rich. And the way you get there is by being intentional, by being honest with yourself, and by making choices that actually move you forward, instead of just making you look like you're moving forward. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole thing. I know it was long, but this is something I genuinely think about a lot, and I think it matters. I think the way we perform wealth, the way we use our money to construct an identity, that's one of the most interesting and complex parts of being human. If you found this helpful, or if it made you think about your own relationship with money and image in a new way, I'd really appreciate it if you'd let me know in the comments. And if you want me to dive deeper into any of these habits, or if you want to talk about what it actually takes to build real wealth, just let me know. I'm always thinking about this stuff, and I love talking about it. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching.